My sister took every man I loved for sport, so I gave her one to chase forever. I was 14 when I realized my sister Millie saw me as a game she couldn't stop playing. It wasn't normal sibling rivalry, but something darker, more deliberate. Like she'd found her purpose in life, and that purpose was making sure I never got to keep anything that made me smile. It started small, like most toxic things do. Jake was my first real boyfriend freshman year. Nothing serious, just hand-holding in the hallways and awkward kisses after school. But Millie would still show up at our lunch table asking innocent questions about homework. She'd laugh at his jokes a little too hard. She'd touch his arm when she talked. 2 weeks later, Jake dumped me at my locker. That afternoon, I saw them making out behind the gym. She kept him for exactly 1 month, then told everyone he was boring. By junior year, every guy who showed interest in me became her next target. David lasted 3 months before she convinced him I was cheating. Michael made it 2 weeks. Ryan broke up with me the day before prom because Millie said she'd seen me kissing someone else at a party. She went to prom with him in the dress we'd picked out together. I thought things would be different when I met Felix sophomore year at State while Millie stayed home for community college. We dated secretly for 3 years, but when we got engaged, I had to tell my family and Mom insisted Millie be my maid of honor. The night before my wedding, I went to Felix's room and found them together. She was wearing the red lingerie from my bachelorette party. They both looked up at me, but only Millie smiled. She smiled like she'd just won the lottery. That's when I felt something break inside me like a bone snapping clean in half. I wasn't going to cry or beg or ask why. I was going to destroy her completely. I spent the next month studying Millie like she was my dissertation. She only wanted men who belonged to someone else, except for Oliver from high school. He was the only guy who ever rejected Millie, and it drove her insane. She still brought him up after a few glasses of wine, calling him the one who got away. I found him on LinkedIn working at a tech company 2 hours away. Over coffee, I told him about every boyfriend she'd stolen, and how she'd finally taken my fiancé the night before my wedding. He wasn't surprised. He said she'd tried every manipulation tactic on him, but he could tell she was fake. When I asked if he'd help me teach her a lesson, he smiled and said he'd been waiting years to see karma catch up with Millie. Oliver started by adding Millie on Instagram, and she followed back within minutes, liking 20 of his photos going back months. He waited 3 days before liking one old photo from our senior year. When she messaged him immediately, he didn't respond for a week. He kept his replies short and distant while she sent 15 messages in a row. Then he posted a photo with a woman's hand wearing an engagement ring barely visible in the corner. Millie called me at midnight sobbing hysterically saying it wasn't fair and that Oliver was supposed to be hers. I pretended to be sympathetic and mentioned I'd heard his fiancé was having second thoughts about the wedding. That lit a fire under her like nothing I'd ever seen. She got a job at the coffee shop where he bought his lunch. She started showing up at his gym and befriended his coworkers to get invited to office parties. She spent her entire savings on a new wardrobe that matched his fiancé's style. She even enrolled in coding boot camp because he'd once mentioned being attracted to women in tech. I watched my sister transform herself completely for a man who was doing to her exactly what she'd done to me. After 3 months, Millie was desperate. She'd maxed out her credit cards and alienated all her friends talking about Oliver nonstop. She finally cornered him outside his office demanding to meet his fiancé. Oliver looked at her calmly and said there was no fiancé. There never had been. He told her I'd asked him to show her what it felt like to lose something you thought was yours. She started screaming that we'd ruined her life, but Oliver just walked away. She called me sobbing and threatening to tell everyone what I'd done, but I just said, now you know exactly how it feels, and hung up. 6 months later, Millie was still texting Oliver from different numbers after he'd blocked her everywhere. At family dinners, she'd tell anyone who'd listen that we'd conspired against her. Our parents finally saw her pattern and stopped taking her calls. Even Felix blocked her after she tried to convince him I'd orchestrated their affair. Meanwhile, I was planning my real wedding to someone who'd never even met my sister. The last time I saw her, she was alone at a restaurant swiping through dating apps. I heard her whisper, "Please be real," before matching with someone. She'd finally become what she'd turned me into. Someone so paranoid about being played that she couldn't trust anyone anymore.